Thank you, Carol, and thank you for all your service to the chapter. So we're doing things differently, and I'm very happy to see that people have arrived for this earlier lecture than we've had in the past. So this year we're going to start lectures soon, and then after the lecture, of course, some of you will run off to have dinner. But if you would like to stick around, we're going to have a little social, and Larry's got some things to show. And I hope that in future months, we will have some of you bring things to show. Like students could bring posters that they've made for class, or somebody's gone to a meeting and given a poster, they could present it, or anything like that. You could bring in plants you want to show off. So that's the idea. And then we're not going to put up the chairs right away. Like, it makes too much noise. And so really what I want you to do is on that clipboard, I want you to sign up. Well, I want you to give away your firstborn child. But aside from that, I want you to sign up to be on the team that will help clean up in future months, not this month. So if you want to come to the evening programs and you want to stick around and you want to be here when we're sweeping up, I would love to have your email address. You won't have to do it every time, but I'll coordinate that. Okay, so hopefully this whole thing will work. Yeah, moving forward. Yes, Alexa.
So the meeting will be here from now on.
Yes, so the meeting will be here for the whole season through May. We'll be starting the lectures, at this time. Okay, so I'm very pleased to kick off this new season with Michael Kauffmann, our star, giving I guess a tour of what it was to write this book. And then afterwards, you can come up and talk with him individually. There'll also be a question and answer session. And Michael is, well, he's been editor of the statewide journal. He's done all sorts of studies. He was once upon a time a K through 12 teacher, and so he's blessed. And he's a very fine parent, we learned last time. And so I really think that you probably heard more about Michael than you've heard about me. And so I won't cut into his time anymore. Let's just give him a warm welcome and hear what he has to say.
All right, thanks, Paul. I appreciate that kind introduction. Really stoked to see all the students and everybody here. I did tell a lot of the professors around that I was going to have a sign-in sheet for extra credit if you showed up, and I forgot the stinking sign-in sheet. So I've come up with a solution. Just come take a selfie with me at the end, and then you can show your teacher, see, I was there. I just want to also thank, before I dive in, CNPS, the North Coast chapter in particular, has been an amazing influence on me, from Carol Ralph over the 20 years that I've known her, to all the people that have worked with and volunteered with, I should say, the North Coast chapter. It's an amazing group of people. And I learned about the North Coast chapter from John Sawyer. He gave me a Fremontia issue about the Klamath Mountains. I think it was published in 2007. And he said, you got to read this, because he knew I loved the Klamath Mountains. And that was really my initiation into the chapter. I became a member soon after that. And we have a pretty cool program for students where if you just show up at 3 events, this being one of them, you will get a complimentary membership paid for by the North Coast chapter. And that's a great way to start your professional relationship with organizations like the California Native Plant Society. So I hope you all consider that. I then became the treasurer, which was the most challenging volunteer job I've ever had in my life. I found out I didn't want to be a treasurer again, but it was a really good learning experience to help the North Coast chapter. And thankfully, I resigned before it became really big and they started to have these plant sales that brought in a bunch of money that they used to support all sorts of great parts of our community, including sending students to conferences around the state, supporting student research, here, in our community from Cal Poly Humboldt to College of the Redwoods. So anyway, it's not, do I need to hold it?
Well, you can hold it.
Yeah, maybe I will. I usually have a very loud test. Is that better? Yeah, okay, better. Anyway, the point is, develop a relationship with some wonderful organization. I would encourage CNPS, if you haven't already. Okay, so let's dive in. This is a book that I can't believe I got to write it, to be honest with you, because I've always loved trees. I had this very special high school teacher who, I grew up in Virginia, and he would take it. We had this swamp behind the high school, and the only requirement of the class is you had to have hip waders. And he would take us out into the swamp, and we would wander around these beaver dams, and he would teach us the trees. And he taught us the trees in the fall when they had leaves, and then he taught us the trees again in the winter when they didn't have leaves, and then, obviously the eastern deciduous forest. And that's when I first developed a relationship with nature. I saw things before that, but that was the first time that I really saw things. And from there, I knew immediately I was going to go to college and I was going to study wild creatures, trees, birds, mammals, and I got a biology degree. And then I moved to California, and I found the book Conifers of California, and I really fell in love with the trees of California. So Matt Ritter, who I'll talk a little bit more about, brought this project to me, and we were great, I think, complementary co-authors. Okay, so I want to start with this quote. I've used this quote in one other presentation, but I don't feel like that you can reasonably start any sort of discussion these days without acknowledging the craziness in the world. So in this moment, is it still possible to face the gathering darkness and to say to the physical earth and to all its creatures, including ourselves, fiercely and without embarrassment, I love you, and embrace fearlessly the burning world? I have to believe that it is still possible, though it's not easy. To love the earth in this moment requires courage, because love does not deny grief or fear. It means standing in the presence of fires and floods and extinction events and unraveling ecosystems and refusing to turn away. It means saying, I see what is happening, I mourn what is lost, and I will still protect, nurture, and cherish what remains. Tonight, I'm going to tell you my story about the trees of California, and I hope that you are inspired to find your own story and share it with others. So California is a special place for trees. There's no doubt about it. Nearly all the forests and woodlands are a unique aspect of the state, the California floristic province in particular, but even the desert and the trees that are in the desert. And I'd like to read a little bit from the introduction of our book. Trees provide us with our most intimate contact with nature. Okay, it's really hard to hear me. Okay, sorry about that. Trees provide us with our most intimate contact with nature. To be near a large and ancient tree is to feel a sense of awe and not easily described on the page or communicated in a photograph. Such trees fill us with a much needed and often deserved sense of irrelevance and impermanence. Trees become more interesting as we learn more about them, and our lives are enriched by paying attention to them. The purpose of this book is to share our love of trees and to help guide the curious on their own to a journey of discovery. California's trees are superlatives. I think we all know, because we're in Humboldt County, we have the tallest tree in the world. We also have the most massive tree, which is the giant sequoia, and the longest lived individual organism, the bristlecone pine. But lesser known facts about our trees include that we have the world's largest pine, which is the sugar pine, the largest oak, which is the canyon live oak, and the list of superlatives goes on. Matt Ritter is actually the keeper of the Big Tree Registry at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, and I encourage you to check that page out. It's really cool to see all the big trees that we have here in California. More than 1/4 of the tree species in the state occur nowhere else, and 3 of our 9 national parks are named for trees. And that's Sequoia National Park, Redwood National Park, and Joshua Tree. And when trying to figure out what trees are native to California, which was a little bit of a challenge for this book, you first have to ask the question, what is a tree? So what is a tree? The line between a tree and a shrub is not always clear. And Matt and I had some really good arguments about what to include and what not to include. And the definition that you find in literature is all over the place. But for our book, We use the definition that it has to be a woody species, obviously. 90% of the total surveyed individuals in the species must mature to the height of 20 feet. And that's just within California. We use that rule. They must have a single dominant trunk more than 6 inches in diameter, 4.5 feet above the ground. So one tree that we really argued about was America californica, the wax myrtle. And I've got trees, wax myrtle trees in my yard. If you go into Oregon, I think it would be considered a tree in a book about trees of Oregon, but we did not include it in our book because most of the specimens south of here are shrubby. So that's just one example of maybe a technical hangup that we had to overcome. I love this Sibley definition. If you walk under it, if you can walk under it, it's a tree. And if you have to walk around it, it's a shrub. And then my friend Jared Farmer, if you haven't read either of his tree books, Trees of Paradise or his new book, Elderflora, I highly recommend it. But I love his definition. Trees are plants that people call trees, and it's a term of dignity, not botany. So none of these plants have read our book, right? They just exist in the world. And it's our job, I think, to understand them and categorize them in our own way, which makes it easier for humans to manage that understanding. The last book on trees of California was by Willis Jepson over 100 years ago, 1923, as a matter of fact. And he had 92 species in this book. So we added a few more. There's some reasons for that I'll kind of get into in a minute. But we settled on 95, right? Taxonomies changed a little bit. John Sawyer and Dale Thornburg discovered new species in the late 60s and early 70s in California, including the Engelmann spruce and subalpine fir. So we've added a little bit to Jepson's list. But we just, again, settled on 95. So I'd like to talk a little bit about tree cover in California. This is a veg camp exercise that I don't think has been done, or if it has, I don't know about it. I'd like to know more, but I kind of looked into the data, and it looks like there's about 33 million acres of forested land out of the 100 million acres in California. So or about a third of the landscape of California is forested. But some of that is oak savanna, some of that chaparral with scattered trees, or high elevation, stunted conifer forests. So, there's some variability there. But the bottom line is, I think we can say about a third of the state. And you can see some of the big pockets that don't have trees, or at least large tree cover. We've got a lot of interesting flora within the California floristic province. There's about, and just to kind of set the scene here, there's about 300,000 species of plants worldwide. That number goes up all the time with new taxonomic and phylogenetic discoveries. But there's about 60,000 tree species worldwide. Again, we have 95 of those in California. And this is only 2% of the total plant species within the state. Most of them are shrubs and annuals, and we'll talk a little bit more about that at the end. But basically 2% of the plant species cover 33% of the landscape. So of course we gotta love trees. So trees by the numbers, just a quick little breakdown. So of those 95 species, there's 20 plant families and 38 genera. There are 10 species that are 10 species are the only member of that genus. So there'd be a monotypic thing like Chalcedrus. 23 are endemic to the state. There are 10 oak trees, which is the second most of any genera, and 52 conifers, 18 of which are in the genus Pinus. So pretty impressive list. A lot of individuals within a family are the only representative. And you can see that in the book because we lay it out by family. And then we show all the representatives of that family within the book. A little breakdown of the conifers, because we all love conifers, right? These are particularly rich again in Pinus and Hesperociperus. Hesperociperus is kind of funny. These are the cypresses. Some people argue we only have a handful of species. Other people split them out. And right now, most people agree it's about 10. But then you can see the breakdown of the rest of them there. And they reach tremendous size within the state, which I'm going to show you on the next slide, some of the really impressive specimens, but we are definitely in the land of big trees. So I'm just going to talk about a couple of the species that are in the book. I'm going to show you the treatment from the book and weave some stories in as we go through. So I'm going to start with the sugar pine because I think this is just an amazing specimen here. This is the largest pine tree in the world by any of the 120 or so species within the genus Pinus, and this is in California. They have the sugar pine has the world's longest pine cone. They can reach 10 to 24 inches long. It's hard to see them like that in our region, but if you go into the Sierra Nevada, they start to get exceptionally long. And they're also the largest of all pines, up to 250 feet tall. Some of the biggest trees, both sugar pine and ponderosa pine, are dying because of drought, but those records have existed and more than 6 feet in diameter, making them the tallest and most massive pine. And sugar pine's actually moving back and forth right now with ponderosa, as unfortunately, like I said, some of those bigger trees are dying. A new ponderosa that's found with LiDAR might take the record for a little bit, but they're very close in record height, those two species. And there's how we treat it in the book. And we're going to look more at how those maps were created towards the end. But within the treatments, we have I think, a really nice range map, some highlighted pictures, a little bit of text about the species, and then some ID tips at the bottom. Another amazing California conifer. This is an endemic species, meaning it grows nowhere else on planet Earth but the Santa Lucia Mountains, kind of south of Monterey. This is the rarest fir in the world. And like I said, it's endemic. And it has these cool bracted cones. There are a few firs in California that have these bracts that extend beyond the scales, like you see here, but none that have this skinny curving bract that flare outward like little tails. And it's the most distinctive of the firs that I know, probably all firs. Who's seen bristlecone or Santa Lucia fir before? All right, a few people. There's at the Botanic Garden. Okay, my favorite hike to see him is Cone Peak in the Santa Lucias. You can get up to like 5,000 feet. Sugar pines and Santa Lucia firs and coulter pines, pretty epic. And that picture on the right there is from Cone Peak, looking out over the Pacific. Now, this is a fun species. This is actually a species that when I first started learning my California conifers, didn't exist, at least to science, right? They were all kind of lumped in as Western junipers, and Robert Adams did some work with other people and split this species out. And I'll show you the range map in a minute, but it's basically a high Sierra Nevada down into the transverse ranges, and which is where I got to meet the species when I lived in the San Gabriel Mountains. There's fewer than 25 individuals in the San Gabriels, but they become more common as you move into the San Bernardinos because of the summer monsoons. It's a little wetter in the high San Bernardinos, and the junipers do a little bit better over there than they do in the San Gabriels. But that all being said, they do have these berry-like cones. So this is in the family Cupressaceae, which is like redwoods and cedars, and they often have these scale-like needles. And what's interesting about junipers in general compared to all the other Cupressaceae is that Cupressaceae, think about a redwood, it's really got a restricted range, but it dominates within that range, right? That's kind of the story of Cupressaceae. It's not the story of the juniper, because the juniper has this berry-like cone that's eaten by birds, flown around, and pooped out, and the birds spread it. So junipers in general have a much broader range than all other members of Cupressaceae, which I think is a pretty cool way to see the trees through the forest. They're also very long-lived. Some junipers are easily over 2,000 years old. And here's the range map. You can see how basically the Sierra juniper kind of starts around Lassen and then heads south and then up in the transverse ranges, the San Bernardinos and the San Gabriels. So this summer I had the exceptional experience of joining my friends from Cal Poly San Luis Obispo and going to the Bennett juniper. And we do have sidebars in the book about exceptional things, and I'll show you a couple of examples. But this is a truly remarkable tree. It's in the Stanislaus National Forest. It's the largest and oldest known Sierra juniper in the world. Again, estimated at 2,000 years, but some people say 6. I don't think they're able to core it. It's so stinking thick. It's only 80 feet tall, but it's got a 12-foot diameter at breast height. And it's named after this guy Bennett, who brought attention and helped sort of preserve this area. You can drive right to it, but it is a haul to drive up the Stanislaus River and find this thing. But it was amazing. And Matt and I got to visit this tree. We remeasured it. It had grown significantly since the last team went in there and measured it. And just a lot. I get great joy out of seeing exceptional species and being able to see this juniper. It was almost like standing next to a redwood. That's how big it was. We also have another sidebar about the world's tallest tree. Did you know the world's tallest tree is a redwood? And I think you probably did. But I love this sidebar because I didn't know this, that basically 4 of the 7 tallest trees on Earth call California home. Now, there is a Douglas fir in Oregon that's 326 feet tall, and our Douglas fir is 324 feet tall. So maybe we don't quite have that 4, but it's pretty darn close, right? And so this includes, obviously, the redwood, the giant sequoia, the Douglas fir, but also Sitka spruce. The Sitka spruce was measured up in Prairie Creek recently, over 300 feet tall. And that was thanks to LiDAR and some serious trekking by a crew to ground truth that thing. So cool sidebars, I think. So we're going to talk a little bit about the flowering trees as well. We have 17 flowering tree families. Most of them, like I said, only have 1 or maybe 2 species that reach tree status, besides Fagaceae, which are the oaks, and then Saliaceae, which include willows and some other stuff, and we'll look at a few of those. So not all unique trees in California are conifers. That was kind of a good learning lesson for me. But 10% of the state is covered by oaks or some sort of oak woodland. And a third of the state and one type or another is covered by desert. And often within that desert ecosystem, there are some trees that reach significant cover class where you could call it a dominant vegetation community by that species. And I kind of wanted to do the yin and the yang because we're in the rainforest here. So I wanted to take you to visit some of my favorite trees of the desert. This is the northernmost native fan palm stand in the world. This is in the Turtle Mountains. If this mountain range was about 100 miles closer to Los Angeles, it would be a national park. It is absolutely phenomenal. These giant volcanic plugs. But there's a little spring, and it's about a 7-mile walk from the trailhead. And you can see these trees, and it's just an amazing spot. There's Native American evidence everywhere. People have been going here for thousands and thousands of years. The Native Americans may have even brought this, the first peoples may have even brought this species to the spring. They played a big role in moving these species, this particular species around. So the fan palm's exceptional in many ways, but it's also highly restricted. There has to be some sort of surface water. So often this is the scene. This is in the Whipple Mountains, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about the Whipples when we get to the saguaro cactus, which is a tree. But they occur in these oases. There's often, bighorn sheep tromping through. So these are the spots that the animals visit because there's a water source. The fan palms are interesting because they are long-lived. Obviously, you can see they get reach significant size. But they also often have this skirt of dead leaves that stays below the live leaves. And that's the main difference between the California fan palm and the Washington fan palm, which are the only 2 members of the genus Washingtonia. And we'll look at some pictures of those in a minute. But I want to talk about those live long-stalked leaves. These arms of the leaves are they're armed with these nasty spines, right? But this is the apical meristem. It's highly protected from herbivory, but very few things eat these anymore. So you rarely today see damage to these leaves. So this is an interesting, in 1986, this guy, James Cornett of the Palm Springs Natural History Museum published a paper in Madronio about this phenomenon. He looked at 300 different individuals and showed that the protective teeth are often lost once the tree reaches about 30 feet high. And he conjectured that these teeth are there to protect the trees against long extinct megafauna. Herbivores like tongued giant ground sloths and mastodons and mammoths that all occurred throughout Southern California in the Pliocene. So these spines could have provided some selective pressure behind the development of that protection and herbivory a long, long time ago, but it's still a trait that exists today, persists today, which is pretty cool, I think. So here's two shots here, or a couple of pictures here of the most commonly planted palm tree in California. This is the Mexican fan palm. You can see it's distinguished by the lack of dead leaves that stay on the stem. They're much taller and skinnier often, much more compact canopies. And that one on the right is the record. It's a 135-foot tall tree in San Luis Obispo that was planted right when that house was built in the late 1800s. So they're long-lived. But there was a recent study in 2021 that complicates this whole story of two species. The authors looked at populations across this gradient all the way down to southern Baja California. And they basically found that it looks like it's just a gradient of characteristics of a single species along this transect. And I bring this up to basically say and remind myself and everyone else that we have a lot more to learn, right? We don't know everything that we think we know about trees. Did you know there's saguaros in California? Has anyone ever seen a saguaro in California? I have not. Cool. So where did you go? Okay, so you saw them in Arizona. Yeah. So there's one little spot that you can find them in California. Does anyone know where that is? I mentioned it earlier. It's called the Whipple Mountains. And if you look at a map of the Colorado River in California and Arizona, it's called the Whipples are in the nose of California. There's this spot that kind of goes out like a nose. And again, kind of like the San Bernardinos and the Sierra Junipers, that area catches much more summer monsoonal rain than the other areas of the California desert. And so this species persists there. Now, they're not vigorously reproducing, but they are there. And another fun fact about the Whipples is that it's the only place in California you can see breeding cardinals, native breeding northern cardinals. So an excuse to get to the Whipple Mountains, maybe not in May or June when the cardinals are breeding. That might be a little harsh, but still cool, kind of a cool place. These things are adapted to store vast amount of water in their stems. They swell after the rains, and when fully hydrated, they can weigh over 4,000 pounds. And they have this white night blooming flower. It's actually Arizona's state flower. It opens in May and June, and it's pollinated by bats and birds and insects. And there's a nice picture of the flower and the developing flower as well from the book. There are a few other occurrences, one of which is around Joshua Tree, but most people argue that that's been recently transplanted after colonization. So I like to say the Whipples are the only place that they're kind of natively reproducing, I guess. All right, let's talk a little bit about oaks and beeches and well, we're not going to talk about beeches, but the oak and beech family, Fagaceae. The oaks are really rooted in California's identity. There are hundreds, well, I mean hundreds, many places named after oaks. Oakland, Thousand Oaks, Encino means oak. Paso Robles means the pass of the oaks. So these oaks were extremely important to the first peoples, to the early explorers and colonizers as just a very fecund place, and they're still an important place. Probably one of the most biodiverse ecosystems or forest types in California, if not the most, is the oak woodland of a variety of different species. There are about 900 species globally in this family in 8 genera. In California, we have Chrysolepis, which there are 2 species, the bush chinkapin and the giant chinkapin. These are both evergreens. They have these spiny burrs with an edible nut. Mostly in the North Coast, they kind of creep a little south. Notholithocarpus, the tan oak, unique to Pacific Coast forests. And then Quercus, there's 21 native species, 10 reach tree-forming size. The others are basically chaparral shrubs. We'll look at a little bit of the shrubs that we didn't include later as well. Possibly one of my favorite of all of the oak species is Quercus tomentella. This is the island oak. It's only found it has been transplanted onto the Southern California coast, but natively before colonization, it was only found on the Channel Islands. Endemic to the islands and also down into Guadalupe. This is a picture of a tree on Santa Rosa Island, probably the world's largest, one of the most beautiful trees that I've ever seen in my life. The leaves are large and leathery and evergreen and with fuzzy undersides, which means tomentose. But the lichen collection on these species, the species on the Channel Islands, is second to none because they catch that fog drip. They're often at the highest elevations where those clouds come in and they just collect it all. Just spectacular. And here's our treatment in the book. You can see, maybe you can see the zoom in of just those islands in California. Okay, so that's just a little taste of the 95 species, but we also had to consider what is not a tree, like I mentioned earlier. So we included some of the iconic shrubs, argued a little bit about, again, we talked about wax myrtle. A few others were kind of like, well, what about a redbud? But you can see the redbud, it often is multi-stemmed, doesn't kind of stick to that tall tree conforming, 6 feet or 4.5 feet above the ground, 6 inches. So we have a whole list of the shrubs, the iconic shrubs that were not included, and we have pictures of most of them. Again, I mentioned the redbud, but toyon is another one that can be tree-like in Southern California, at least in certain areas. Other iconic shrubs are the flannel bush, arroyo willow, which is extremely common. I've come to learn after doing some vegetation surveys across the Klamath Mountains. California juniper looks like a tree in many instances, but not 90% of them. And then the Tucker oak, which is a Southern California chaparral specialist. And then there are 11 native oak species which do not become trees; they remain shrubs. So Matt's first book is called California's Guide to the Trees Among Us. And I did not catch on to this book at first because this is more for the urban landscape, and that's not necessarily maybe my favorite place to be. But I really love this book because it does look at what works in California's urban landscape. And I'll just introduce Matt real quick. He's a botanist and professor at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, and he's spent many years studying trees. From their scientific intricacies to their quiet roles in our lives, particularly, again, in urban areas. He started with Jen Yost at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, the Urban Forestry Institute, and they do work like after the fires in LA. They were one of the first people on the scene. They were looking at what trees made it, what trees might have been vectoring the fire, and they are consultants about replacing those trees within the urban interface. But I really do believe that Matt is an excellent tree storyteller. He writes as if he's walking beside you down a neighborhood street, pointing out to you the stories that are hidden behind the barks and the leaves. And his guide here just isn't about identifying them. It's about seeing them and really understanding them and understanding their relationship to that human landscape. And I think our book is a nice complement to his first book, California's Guide to the Trees Among Us. So we do talk about in the book some of the naturalized trees in California, of which, again, Matt is the expert here. These are the trees that are not native to the state that reproduce here sometimes on their own. And when they do that, they're called naturalized trees. But we don't have a lot of serious weedy trees in California. And that's basically due to the lack of water. I'll show you a graphic in a minute. But basically, of the 1,000 non-native naturalized plant species in California, 29 are trees, and only 7 have reached the designation by the California Invasive Plant Council as moderately invasive or, higher. So we don't have a lot of weedy trees, which is interesting. Okay, I already went through this. Sorry, I should have advanced the slides. 29 of those are trees of the 1,000 non-native naturalized plants. And again, only 7 have that designation. Okay, so if the state has 95 native species, where are they? There's been a lot of changes since Jepson. We now have crowdsourced information like citizen science, massive observations of species on programs like iNaturalist and the California Consortium of Herbarium, we have the ability now to make much better maps. And when I first started making range maps back in mid 2000s, when I was doing conifer country, it was me, looking at this source in a book and looking at this source and using a little bit of CalFlora, because CalFlora was just sort of launching back then. But now they're all much more readily available, which is an amazing resource. So we turned to one of Matt's previous grad students and a modern day cartographer. Her name is Cami Pollock. And she started to look at these patterns of tree diversity across the state. She took maps, painstakingly collected all these maps, overlaid them in GIS, and the results are the maps that we have in the book. She then, we have things that are not very common, like Sargent cypress, to the most common tree we believe in California, which is the Pacific willow. The maps are a wide range of coverage across the state based on the species. We also have trees that are rare in California, but widespread elsewhere. So I mentioned subalpine fir being sort of a recent discovery in California. We also know that Sitka spruce reaches its southern range extension on the Mendocino coast. So these are new discoveries, new documentations that Cami was able to take into account with her research. And then we also went to the extent of showing where trees have become native trees have become naturalized. So I think one of the most interesting pines in the world is the Monterey pine, because it was basically restricted to 3 small populations around Monterey, north and south of Monterey. And then people discovered, hey, if we move this out, if we release this species out into new ecology, it actually does really well. And we see them, of course, spread all along Highway 101 up here, many of which are dying after about 100 years of planting. But we also included some of those naturalized ranges in the range maps. So Cami then took all of those 95 range maps and laid them over each other and created this amazing heat map, which looks at where the most tree diversity is within the state. And I have to admit, I wasn't that surprised with at least one of the places she discovered. But what she did obviously find as well in this pattern is the same pattern that we see in precipitation mounts. So that's kind of cool too. So this is, again, one of the reasons why introduced trees are rarely invasive. It takes water to make a tree. And then large parts of California have 0 tree diversity. There's about 400 square miles, we estimate, in the Mojave Great Basin and San Joaquin Valley deserts that only have shrubs and annuals. So what are the hot spots that she found? Well, she found that there's 24 species that nearly overlap right in our famed Miracle Mile of Western Siskiyou County. But then she also found, she was able to look at those endemic species, and she found that 8 endemic species live on or around Mount St. Helena. So kind of cool places to think about visiting. This is Robert Louis Stevenson State Park. I've been there one time to find Torreya californica, which we call the California nutmeg. But you can find sugar pines on the summit of Mount St. Helena. So it's a real interesting amalgamation of habitat types that meet, north and southern California. And that QR code will take you to the location of Robert Louis Stevenson State Park. If you're interested, you can probably just Google it too. And then in Western Siskiyou County, this is East Boulder Lakes, but I think that between this area and the Russian Wilderness, which is actually very close as the crow flies, this is the real hotspot of conifer diversity, as we know, for the Miracle Mile, with 18 species of conifers in just 1 square mile. And then if you get into a little bit lower elevation in this area, you're going to pick up some of the flowering trees as well. So 24 species of trees in this one area. So we were inspired to also include some tree destinations. I think it's really important to get out and see the trees. So I'm not going to go into huge detail here, except for we've got places all across the state. But I sort of sung the glory of the San Gabriel Mountains. And I wanted to share a few pictures from this mountain range. Who's ever been into the San Gabriels? North of Los Angeles, John Muir called them the steepest mountains he ever walked in. They basically go from the LA basin at about 1,000 feet to 10,000 feet on the summit of Mount Baldy and Pine Mountain. They have endemic conifers like the big-cone Douglas fir. I was fortunate enough to work for CMPS and map the big-cone Douglas fir when this became a national monument back in 2016, 2017. I fell in love with this tree. This is near Mount Wilson, along the Highway 2. There's a highway that travels the high country of the San Gabriels. It's a can't miss if you're down there. I mentioned the highest point, Mount Baldy, just over 10,000. But it's a real biodiversity hotspot. You have Mojave Desert species. You have influence from the coast and the coastal chaparral, and obviously pine forests, and one of the most amazing populations of bighorn sheep in the state. I lived and worked here in a little town called Wrightwood. When I first moved to California, I taught environmental education for Los Angeles County, and I had this one secret spot in the headwaters of the San Gabriels that I go to every October, and I just watch the bighorns ram their heads together, and you would just echo all around me, and the maples were turning yellow, and it's a magical place. Love the San Gabes. Epic trees as well. Check out this canyon live oak. I think this is the largest canyon live oak on planet Earth. There's my coworker Daniel Hastings standing under this tree. This is deep in the San Gabriel River country. Here's sort of an overview of the San Gabriels. That oak tree is down in that canyon. If you walk the San Gabriel River into San Dimas, you can't miss it. But this is actually Mount Baden-Powell, where there are limber pine and lots of other, endemic buckwheats and all sorts of cool stuff down there. But let's go to the top of it real quick. I want to show you the lodgepole pine at the summit of Baden-Powell. That's looking over towards Baldy. You can kind of see the haze of the LA Basin to the right there. Southern range extension of lodgepole pine is just south of here in the Sierra San Pedro de Martir National Park in Baja. But if you turn around from this spot, you'll notice that trees are not necessarily doing well in many places. And I just want to acknowledge this as well. This is because of drought. They have top dieback. They don't have enough water to cycle through that system. So the tree starts to retreat back as a response to drought. And there are other places in California that we see trees that are not doing well. On the left there, this is from the summit of English Peak in the Marble Mountains. And you can see what the 2014 White's Fire did to that Devil's Canyon in the North Fork, little North Fork of the Salmon River country. And then we also have on the right decline of whitebark pine at high elevations. You can see Mount Shasta in the background, but the bark beetle is definitely taking its toll on some of these high elevation pines. So I think we all speak for the trees because trees have no tongues, and I'm asking you all at the top of my lungs. I actually have the whole Lorax memorized. I won't say it all to you though. I'm going to end with this. These are the 10 things that I wish all kids, because I work with kids a lot, but I think we're all kids at heart, need to know about trees. I work for Save the Redwoods League. It's one of these jobs that I keep thinking, do I really need to do this? Do I really need to run around in the woods with kids 20 times a year? And I always come back to the answer that it's yes. I love this job. And so Save the Redwoods League asked me to write a little story about 10 things I think kids can know about trees. And it hasn't been published yet, but I'm going to share it with you right now. And I would also love to know if I've left anything out. So please, give me some feedback. So number one, I think trees are time travelers. Every tree is a living timeline. Some grow for decades, others for centuries, and a few, like the coast redwood, stretch across millennia. When you place your hand on a trunk, you are touching time itself, held in rings of wood that record fire and flood and drought. Trees remind us that patience is power. Trees breathe with us. Trees inhale what we exhale. Carbon dioxide that leaves our lungs is drawn into their leaves, where it is transformed into sugar and wood. In turn, trees release oxygen, filling the air that we depend on. This ancient exchange links every breath that we take to forests. And this process, called, of course, photosynthesis, is the most important chemical reaction on Earth. Trees speak a silent language. And though they stand rooted, trees are far from muted. Beneath the soil, their roots connect with fungi and vast networks that share water and nutrients. Scientists call this the wood wide web. And a tree under stress can signal its neighbors, and healthy ones often lend resources to seedlings. It's a community, not a competition. Trees know their home. Each tree belongs to a particular home. Willows lean towards rivers. Bristlecone pines rise from dry slopes on some of the highest mountains in the West, and redwoods thrive in the fog-laced coast. Learning to recognize a tree means learning its story of soil, climate, and water. Trees teach us that belonging comes from this relationship with place. Trees wear the seasons. I mentioned my high school teacher, and he taught me to understand trees in the language of the seasons. The big leaf maple in October blazes yellow, but by February, it speaks only the opposite of twigs and papery gray bark covered in thick moss. Knowing trees through all the seasons reminds us that change is natural. Trees shelter life. Every tree is a habitat. Birds nest in their branches, squirrels cache acorns in their hollows, lichens cling to the bark, and fungi weave through their roots. Even a fallen log is not dead, but bustling with beetles and salamanders and moss. And to know trees is to see them as cities of life. Some trees burn and return. In many forests, fire is not destruction, but renewal. Oaks, pines, and redwoods have evolved with flames that clear the underbrush and make way for new growth. Indigenous people have long understood this relationship, using cultural burning to steward healthy landscapes. Trees teach us that disturbance can also bring resilience and increased biodiversity. And this picture is actually the very first time I understood this. I was with John Sawyer, and we walked into the Limestone Ridge area, the Trinity Alps, and there had just been a fire, and times have changed. When we did this, the fire was still burning, and we were allowed to go in the forest. Nobody was there. That doesn't happen anymore. But I got to see like the smoldering, I'd never experienced a forest fire like this, and people in the audience definitely know this better than I, but I got to see this, and then within just several weeks of that fire burning, this white oak had resprouted. And for me, that was life-changing and eye-opening. Trees connect us to culture. For thousands of years, people have turned to trees for food and medicine and tools and inspiration. From the acorns that sustained California tribes to the tribes of the Pacific Northwest that carved, I shouldn't use past tense here, I'm sorry, that carve Western red cedar into canoes. Trees are teachers and providers. What we learn, sorry, that totally threw me. I always try not to do that, and I blew it on this slide, so you got to forgive me for that. When we learn their gifts, we step into a lineage of respect and reciprocity. Trees invite us to wonder. This is my son, Silas. There is a kind of magic in standing beneath a redwood, craning your neck towards a canopy that disappears into the mist, or watching a sycamore's patchy bark glow white under the moonlight. These moments spark awe, and awe is the seed of stewardship. When we fall in love with trees, we begin to care for the earth. Trees show us the forest. Perhaps the most important lesson, never forget to see the forest through the trees. Each trunk is a story, but together they weave a large narrative of ecosystems, of watersheds, and of climate. A single redwood is extraordinary, but a redwood forest is a cathedral of interdependence. Trees remind us that our lives, too, are strongest when intertwined. And this is my son Silas with Lucy Kohulis's kids up in Neyland at an exceptional Douglas fir, actually, on Mark and Melinda's property. Robert probably knows that tree. Robert Child's here. Okay, so I love trees. So, really my main message is whether you love trees or whether you love birds, or whether you just love a mountain, we got to tell those stories. And if we don't tell those stories, I think we're up Schitt's Creek. Natural history, I believe, leads to a love of the earth, leads to caring for the earth, and leads to a sustainable future. So how can you do it? I've mentioned a few things. I've never provided action items before, but I'm feeling like it's a little desperate times right now. So, get out there and observe things. During COVID, I took my kids out every day and we go to the same plant. We'd measure that trillium growing, that sort of stuff is powerful. Share natural history, study native plant communities and their ecologies, start with one plant, expand to others, just get to know what's around you. And then share the stories of those plants with friends, with family members, with community groups. Your voice can inspire more stewardship. Can create connections through stories. Go on a Native Plant Society hike. Talk with people about what they're seeing, what your understanding is, what their understanding is. Create a connection through natural history, through plants, and record these oral histories. Talk with elders, talk to youth, and nurture those relationships, understand the relationships that the elders have and what relationships you can pass on to the next generation. Restore and protect, join and support a local habitat restoration group, pull weeds. CMPS North Coast chapter offers a lot of weed pulling opportunities. They will also share those opportunities at other organizations like state parks. Facilitates, advocate for protecting a wild or semi-wild area in your neighborhood. There's 73 acres for sale next to me, and I'm trying to figure out how can this become a working forest. I want to connect with, say, the Redwoods League, and I don't want it to just be a cyclical logging thing, so one person can make a small amount of money every time they go in there and destroy the watershed. There's good logging. I'm not against logging. It needs to happen, and then speak the language of love. I think this is the most important thing. Love is not something we talk about a lot in science. You're not going to read a scientific paper and, everyone's going to say, oh, I just love how my study turned out. But I think they should, gosh darn it. Talk about love, find something you love, and share that love. And normalize that emotion because that's the roots of sustainability. We have a checklist in the book. I want you to go find your homework assignment, find all 95 species. Report back, please. I'm easy to find. Just Google me, tell me your stories, tell me your tree stories. And that's what I got. There's Matt and I's measuring the Bennett juniper. Check out the Big Tree Registry. I'll leave it at that. I'll take questions for a few minutes. Are we doing questions after this? Yeah, we'll do a couple of questions and then we'll all kind of find our fun place in here to tell more stories. Paul.
Yeah, so let's see if I can get this thing to work. Yeah, so I like to ask a question. Number 4, you kind of implied that we should notice the niches of trees.
Was this the one about the community? I don't actually have the numbers.
No, it's they know their place.
Okay, know their place. Yeah.
And I think that's probably true of pretty much any kind of organism.
Right.
But I'd actually think that it might be a little less true of trees because of number 1, which was trees record history.
Right.
And I say this because I think that the trees and the woody plants in general, they remember the plow. Whereas lots of other plants like mosses and annuals might actually be more tied into what we would think of as the physiological niche. So I'd like your reaction on that.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think you're talking about maybe shorter lived species versus longer lived species. And the other thing is culture, human culture has moved these trees around for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. So I think that what's important about relationship to place with trees is also that relationship that they have with humans over time. Maybe not all trees, but many trees. So anyway, I think that's probably my easiest answer at this point to say that you're right. Moss might come back faster, but when trees are established, it's often with the helping hand of a human. So let's go plant a tree too, I guess. A native tree. Yes.
So you mentioned that LiDAR is being used to find the tallest or most voluminous trees.
Yeah.
Can you talk about how they identify the oldest crystal zones? Besides some morphometric stuff.
Yeah, so I mean, the big thing with bristle cones is they're able to do that cross dating. So they can take a core that maybe goes back 1,000 years, match it up with a core from a different part of the tree that maybe goes back another 1,000 years, and you use those cross references. And then the other exceptional thing about bristle cones is they're in this environment that doesn't really facilitate decomposition because it's so dry and high. So even dead trees can tell that story for quite a bit of time. So they've been able to go back, I believe it's 6,000 or 7,000 years. It might be even a little bit more. I'm not an expert in dendrochronology, but they've been able to take bristlecone back quite a bit of time. And then they can use within those rings, they can use the carbon footprint to do carbon dating and look at the environment at that time. Pretty cool. Allison Carroll, if you don't know her, is an exceptional dendrochronologist, and she's on campus right here. Is Allison here? Could she answer better? Okay, well, cool. Oh, Gordon.
Well, I've got two thoughts. One is it seems like one of the definitions of a tree is that it's woody.
Yeah.
And then there's the saguaro cactus.
Yeah.
So I'm like, how can you like
Yeah.
have
Yeah.
saguaro?
Yeah.
So that's number one. Then there's this general interest, almost a fetish with longevity.
Yeah.
That we all want to live forever and this, long live stuff. Can you speak to what are the shortest lived trees?
That's a good question. I love that question. I'll just say to the saguaro, I did argue with Matt about that. He was adamant on keeping it. I get it. I think it's fun to have a cactus in there. And you can walk under it. So, but you're right. It doesn't fit that definition of a woody, it doesn't lay down the hardwood like all the other trees we're talking about. And then the shortest lived, I'm going to go with, it's got to be, well, my first instinct is to say a willow. But I mean, what do you think?
I'm thinking alders.
Oh, yeah, alders, yeah.
Alder,
Yeah.
40 years.
Yeah. Yeah, we have a good sidebar in the book about the short-lived life of an alder and how they're so dependent on disturbance. And then they're the first ones, and they set the nitrogen in the soil, and then they die, and then the forest succession happens. That's a good answer. I like that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Good question. Thanks, Gordon. Yes.
How you.
Yes. So we actually have a sidebar about that too, and we talk about bristlecone being the oldest non-clonal organism. So the thing with aspens is they just kind of keep shooting out, and it is the same genetics that I think as long as 20,000 years, to say those trees are old. But the individuals, there's a lot of fine distinctions that you have to make when you make an argument one way or the other. But yeah, that's great. That's a great discussion. Okay. Oh yeah, go ahead. Yep.
I said earlier that they're possibly once in the right now, like all the classes that I've been always heard about are actually split. Right. Is there what will happen in terms of next song? One reading, one thing.
I think this is not my expertise, but you would go back and you would look at what was first described, and I believe that Dane isn't here. Dane probably just like that would be. But yeah, I think the bottom line of that is that there's this environmental gradient, and those characteristics change. And because of the visuals, people split them into two, but based on the genetic work, the genetics are all the same. So it should be lumped back together. So there is a process. There's a, the taxonomy has all its rules. So you would go back to that, maybe the earliest description, and that would be the winner, whether it's the California fan palm or the Mexican fan palm, I don't know. And I don't know if anyone's moving to make this grand change or not.
But it's an interesting paper and it's, relatively new, 2021. So change is afoot. Change is always afoot, right? Yes,
Inspiring.
thank you. Appreciate that.
And I was wondering, with your map with the 30% coverage, would it be different from pre-colonization?
Wow, that's a good question. Wow, I would say probably not. Because trees are still growing where the water is.
So Central Valley, the Central Valley.
Central Valley probably had more trees along the riparian corridors. Yes, than there in Hill. And then, I guess you could make the argument that the almond trees are providing pretty good percent cover down there now. But yeah, I think you're right. I think it's probably about the same. Maybe even more tree cover now, actually, with fires. It's particularly with Douglas fir and oak. So, yeah.
So I think we should maybe change the action a little bit. So I will be here, this desk, and people can go up and listen to what he has to say. But yeah, I think it's a good time to give him a round of applause.
Thanks for coming. I encourage you to grab a book from the table back there and come talk to me about it.
I can't wait for that